In this tutorial, we will cover saving and loading in Unity. I'm going to start by creating a start screen with some UI elements. So I will create some buttons. And when I create a button, it automatically creates a canvas for the button. And it's important when you're placing UI elements that you specify where you want to bind the UI elements. So if you have your buttons in the center of the screen, you'll want to keep them bound to the center as they are by default. But if you wanted to have your buttons be maybe in the corner of the screen, then you would want to change where they're bound to be the closest corner to where your UI elements are. So I'm going to keep mine in the center for this. And I'm not going to use the default Unity button because it's pretty boring. So I have imported some UI assets. You can find UI assets on the Unity Asset Store, or you can make your own. So I've made these in Photoshop. And when you're bringing in UI assets, the first thing you want to do is select all of your assets and change the texture type from default to Sprite, 2D, and UI. This allows you to use them as UI elements. And then hit apply. Now I can use these as my button image. So if I select my button, the first thing you can change is the source image, which is the image part of the button. And I'm going to use button up as the source image. And when you bring in a new image like this, it's a good idea to choose set native size and then resize it down from there. That way you can see what is the default aspect ratio of that image. So let's try just taking this down to about I could do a little bigger than that. So that looks okay for the button size. Another thing that's important when you're working with UI elements is you want to select your canvas and change the constant pixel size to scale with screen size. That way, when you play your game on different monitors, your buttons and your UI elements will be resized based on the size of the screen that you're playing on, which is usually what you want. So I have my button up state for the default of what the button looks like. And Unity's buttons, by default, they have a hover over and a click, and it's just changing the tint of the color. So that's the default for how it works. So what I actually want to do is I want to use my own images for the hover over and the clicked state. So on the button component, you can change the transition. You can either use sprite or animation. Both of these give you a lot of flexibility over how the button should work. The sprite option allows you to drag in an image for the highlighted state and the pressed state. The animation version will generate a set of animations for this button that will allow you to animate things like the color, the scale, the actual sprite image that it's using, even adding sound effects for the different states. So animation gives you a lot of power here. But for now, I'm just going to use the sprite swap option. This is the easier one to use. And I'm going to add the over state as my highlight version. And I have one called button down for the pressed state. Now if I hit play, I can see I have a hover over, which adds a green outline around it, and then a pressed down state. So the next thing I want to change is the text. This is going to be, this is my start screen. And so what I'm going to have on my start screen is I'm going to have a few different buttons. I'm going to have a new game button at the top. I'm going to have a load game button that will load the previous save. And then I'm going to have an exit button so the user can quit out of the experience. Now, when I'm working with start screens, I absolutely hate seeing the Unity skybox in the background of my UI. You can add a background image for your start screen, but for now, I'm actually going to just change the color of the main camera so that we don't see the skybox while we're working. And you can do that by changing this top one, clear flags, to solid color. And then you can specify a color. So maybe I want it to be maybe a dark purplish gray background. Or maybe I want a lighter background. No, I'll go with a darker background. All right, so I want to have my my buttons have text on them. So the top one, as I said, is going to be a new game button. And I'm going to change the font so it's not using the default Unity font. On most computers, you have fonts that come with your computer, and you can just search for your fonts folder. You can also download fonts from the internet. So I've gone ahead and imported one of the fonts that came with my computer, and I'm going to apply that font to the text. So the font section right here, you can either hit the circle and choose a font, or you can drag the font into the font slot, and it'll apply that font to the text. You can also adjust the font size here if you want to make the font size larger. And it really helps with adding text into your scene if you use an outline. I find that outline helps a lot with making text more readable. And then have either a dark color for your font and a light color for your outline, or vice versa. So I'm going to do a light color for my text and a dark color for my outline. I'm going to make the outline just a little bit smaller. And it just helps make the text pop a little bit. I'm also going to shift the text up just a tiny bit so it looks a little bit more centered on my button. And now I want to duplicate this button. So this will be this is my new game button. So I'll use Control D to duplicate. And my second button, I will change the text to say load game. And I'll have one last button that says exit. Now I need to add some functionality to these buttons. Buttons in Unity by default have an on-click event, which will call any function I put in here whenever I click on the button. So I'm going to create a new C# script. I like to keep all of my button functions in one script, which I usually call menu buttons. Make sure you don't use a space in your script name. So I'll call that menu buttons, and I'll open up my script. In this script, I'm going to create a couple of custom functions, which I'm going to link to my buttons. So the first one I'm going to do is a public start button. So it'll be the button the function I link to my new game button. And I'm going to have this load the next scene, or load the first scene. So I'm gonna, at the top, in order to load between scenes, I need to add using Unity engine dot scene management. And then I can do scene manager dot load scene. And I'm going to load scene 1. Since my start screen will be scene 0, then scene 1 will be the first level. And now I can link this function to the button in the scene. If I select the button that I want to link, and then in the on-click area, we can hit plus, and then it needs an object to drag in here. And what we need to do is we need to have a game object in our scene that has the script attached to it. So I usually make an empty game object to make it easier to find. Just call it menu buttons and attach the script to that game object. Then the button, we drag the game object into this slot. So it's important, we're not dragging the script in, we're dragging the game object from the scene into this slot. And then from the no function drop down, we can choose menu buttons. And start button was the name of that function. And I don't have a level 1 yet, but I do have, this is going to be my start screen. So I'm going to go ahead and save this scene as, and I'm going to call it start screen. And then I'm going to create a new scene. This will be my level 1. So I'll save this as level 1. So now I can go back to my start screen and I can go to File, Build Settings, and here's where I can add my scenes into the scene list. So I'll have my start screen first, so you can see that it is scene 0, and then I will drag in level 1. So now level 1 is scene 1, and the start screen is scene 0. Now we can test this and see that the start button takes us into level 1. So now what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and add some functionality for my exit button. Create a new public function called exit button. And when they press the exit button, I want to call application.quit. This will close out of the application when it's running. Now we can't test this in Unity because it's not going to actually close Unity. So we would need to actually make a build in order to test that this is working. But I'm going to go ahead and link that to my exit button. Same way that we did with the new game button. So drag the game object into the slot for on-click, and then locate the exit button function. The next thing I want to do is I want to be able to load a previous save. And so in order to do that, I need to have some information that I'm going to save. So I'm going to make a new C# script called Game Manager, and this is going to save some information from one playthrough to the next. So let's go ahead and open that up. And what I'm going to do in my Game Manager is, just to keep it simple, I'm just going to have a key press on the keyboard that's going to update some saved information. So I'm going to have a public int, and I'm gonna use the spacebar on the keyboard. So I'm gonna call this spaces, and it's going to keep track of how many times I've pressed the space bar on the keyboard. And so in my update function, I'm going to check if input.getKeyDown keycode.space. So if the user presses the space bar, I will add 1 to my spaces value. Now I want my game manager I'm going to have my game manager exist on the first scene, and then I want it to progress through every scene in the game. So in my start function, I need to include a function called don't destroy on load, and in parentheses we put game object, which refers to the game object that this script is attached to. So I will attach it to a game object in my scene, and now that object won't be destroyed from one level to the next. So let's go ahead and save that script. And I'm going to make a new empty game object in my scene called Game Manager and attach the Game Manager script. And I can see this public variable here. And I can test this out real quick just to make sure that it's working. So I have in my start screen, I can press the space bar and I can see the number going up. And if I hit new game, the game manager still exists and it still has the number of spaces that I pressed from the previous scene. So this could represent something that you're collecting from different levels, or you could be keeping track of how many enemies you killed, or anything that you want to keep track of. You could also keep track of which levels the player has reached. So I'm just using the keys on the keyboard just to keep it simple of the information that I'm trying to save. So now I need to actually save that information. And in Unity, the way that we save information is with PlayerPrefs. This creates a file that's not part of your game that has information stored in it that exists even when the game is not running. So it allows the game to pull that information in when you start the game up again, so that it has that information from the last time you played through. So what we want to do is we want to use PlayerPrefs, and we're going to set a value. So we want to use this spaces variable that we have here. So we'll do a set int, because an int is the type of variable that I used. That's this type up here. So set int, and now I need to name it something. This is what it would be named in the save file. So this is not the same as the variable name. This is whatever I want to call it. So I'm going to call this spaces counter. And then I need to tell it a value. And I could put an actual number in here, but what I actually want to do is I want to use whatever value I have for my spaces variable. So I'll put spaces here as the value. Now in order to actually use this information, so this is setting the information, and if I want to use the information the next time I play this, what I need to do is I need to get this information. So I need to do PlayerPrefs dot get int, and I need to use the same name so it can find this value, spaces counter. And now I need to do something with this. So this is getting the value, and what I want to do is I want to store that value as my spaces variable. So my spaces variable is going to go and find that save file and locate this spaces counter, and it's going to store that value. And this is going to happen right at the beginning when I first launch the scene. So now if I save this script and go back into Unity, I should be able to see this working. So press space a few times. Let's get it up to 5. Now turning off play and turning it back on again is how you can emulate the idea of closing and reopening the game. So that would be the same if I closed and reopened the game. And now I can see that that spaces variable kept track, so it still says 5. And I could go up to 8, And there it is again. So now it still is keeping track of that value. So what I want to do is I want to, when I hit load game, I want to keep that value. But if I hit new game, I want to reset that value to 0. So in my script for my menu buttons, I'm going to make another function, public void load button. And if I had multiple scenes, what I'd actually want to do is use my game manager to keep track of which scenes I've gotten to. But I only have one scene for right now, so I'm still going to load scene 1. And then what I want to do in my load button is I'm not going to do anything in the load button so that it's going to keep that value the same. But in my start button, this is if I start a new game, I'm going to reset the spaces value. So I'm going to do game object dot find game object with tag game manager, and I haven't made this tag yet, but I will in just a moment. And then we'll do dot get component, and this is the name of the script, game manager dot spaces equals 0. So now I'm resetting that value to 0. But I also need to reset the PlayerPrefs value. So PlayerPrefs is one of the nice things is you can access it from any script. So even though I'm setting the value in my game manager script, I can also set the value in my menu button script. So I can do PlayerPrefs dot set int spaces count, and I'm going to set it back to 0. So that will clear out my saved information. Now I can save that script, and we can attach our load button function. So select the load button in the scene, and in the on-click section, we'll add our menu buttons, game object, choose your function from the script. Now when I hit play, if I select my game manager, I can see it still remembers the save value from before, so it still says 8. If I hit load game, it stays at 8. But if I go back, start over, now if I hit new game, and I just realized I need to actually tag my game manager first. So let's select our game manager object and create a new tag for it called game manager and apply that tag. Now we should be able to test this. And when I hit new game, now my spaces goes back to 0. Starts from 1 again, so it'll go up to 5. And turn it off and turn it on again. And if we hit load, it keeps that value. So now our load button keeps the values from the previous playthrough, and our start button resets the value to 0. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to have a pause menu that pops up in my game so that I can come back to the start screen. So whether I hit load or new, once I'm in my game, I want to be able to go back to the main menu. So I'm going to create a new, I'm actually going to create a new canvas. I'm going to make it a child of the game manager. That way it will exist in all of the scenes. So no matter what scene I'm in, I can press escape and open my pause menu. So I'll create a new canvas. And I'm going to make this a child of the game manager. And I also want to make this canvas just as I did with the other one. I want to make it scale with screen size. And on this canvas, I'm going to add a panel. Panels by default stretch, and they're also by default semi-transparent. So we can start by making it a solid color. And then we don't maybe want to go all the way to the edge. A lot of times the pop-up menu is just in the center of the screen, so we can give it some buffer from the edges. And we could also add an outline to make it a little bit more distinct. And then on this panel, I'm also going to add some buttons. And I'm going to duplicate one of my previous buttons since I already have those set up. And drag it so it's a child of the panel. And this button is going to be, I'm going to make this, say, main menu. Then I'm going to have another button and this will be, actually, I'm going to delete that second button. I'm going to duplicate my exit button. So I'm going to use my exit button to also exit out of the game. So this is already linked to the exit button function. One problem, though, is this button is referencing this menu buttons here. And so I need this menu buttons to exist in all of the scenes so that these buttons have access to it. So I'm going to make it a child of the game manager. And so it's going to come with me through all of the scenes. And another thing that I need is also this event system. So this is how Unity handles the button hover over and button click. So I need the event system also to come with me on the game manager. Anything that I make a child of the game manager, since the game manager persists through all of the levels, all of these things will as well. But the things in this scene can still reference the things on this game manager. So I have my menu button and my exit button for my pause menu. And my exit button already has the exit button function. Now I need a main menu button. So I'm going to go back to my menu button script. I'm going to add another public void, and this will be menu button. So this button, the function I want it to do is to take me back to the first scene. So that would be scene manager dot load scene 0. Scene 0 will be my start screen. So this load scene 0 will take me back to the start screen. Now the other thing that I want to do is when I reload scene 0, what's going to happen is I'm going to end up with 2 copies of my game manager script, or my game manager object, which has the game manager script. And I don't want 2 copies of that running. And the reason for this is since it has don't destroy on load, when I reload back to scene 0, there's a game manager in scene 0. So it's going to create a game manager, but the previous one is not going to be destroyed. So what I want to do when I press the menu button to go back to scene 0, before I load scene 0, I actually want to destroy the game manager. So I can destroy, and then this game manager that pops up when I start typing, this is the actual script, but I want to destroy the game object. So I destroy game object dot find game object with tag game manager. So that should destroy the extra game manager in the scene before we load scene 0. Now I need to link this function to my menu button. And I don't want this panel to exist by default. I want this to pop up when I press the escape key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the entire canvas here actually. I'm going to uncheck this box here. And then in my game manager script, in my update function, I'm going to check if the user presses the escape key. So that would be if input.getKey down keycode dot space. Sorry, not space, escape. So if the user presses the escape key, then we want to turn on that pop-up. So I'm going to make a public game object called pause menu. And then when we press the escape key, I want to do pause menu dot set active true. Then we need to actually give the game manager a reference to this pause menu object, which is the canvas. So now what this will do is anytime I press the escape key, it turns on the pause menu. But what you might notice is I can't turn the pause menu back off. Even if I... so the escape key doesn't turn the pause menu back off. I have to choose main menu to reload the start screen. So what that means is if I am in my main level, I can't turn this off without returning to the main menu. And generally users would like to be able to close the pause menu when without having to return to the main menu. So maybe they change their mind and they want to just keep playing. So I need the escape key to actually toggle whether or not this is turned on. And so this set active is actually checking and unchecking this box. And so what I can do instead of setting it to true, what I want to do is I want to determine if it's on or off. And so we can do that by using this thing called active in hierarchy, which tells us whether or not this is checked or unchecked. And so this would tell us whether or not the pause menu is on or off. And I want to actually reverse whether it's on or off. And in code, the way that we reverse a Boolean value, a true or false value, is with the exclamation point. So this exclamation point says whatever value this is, if it's on or if it's off, switch it so that it's the other one. Now if we save this, we should be able to turn our pause menu on and off with the escape key. One thing that might be nice to do is to have the panel play a sound effect when it turns on and off. So I'm going to add a audio source component. I'm just going to put it on the canvas panel. And I'm going to turn off this play on awake. And then I've downloaded a sound effect from the internet that I'm going to use. And I'll just drag it into the audio clip slot. Now what I can do in my game manager script, when I press the escape key, in addition to turning this pause menu on or off, I can also do pause menu. Actually, I just realized, so if the pause menu is turned off, I don't think the sound effect will play. So instead of having this sound effect on the menu, I'm going to copy this component and remove it from this canvas. And instead, I'm just going to attach it directly to the game manager. And now in my game manager script, whether I'm turning the menu on or off, what I can do is get component audio source. This finds an audio source that's attached to my game manager object, and then dot play. And so that will play the sound effect. Let's see if it works. All right, so now we have a sound effect that plays when our pop-up menu comes on or off. So we have a new game button, which will clear our progress. We have a load game button, which saves our progress. We have a variable that progresses with us from one scene to the next. And we have a pause menu that can either take us back to the main menu or can exit out of the game. So that shows the process of saving and loading in Unity. I hope you found this tutorial useful, and please like and subscribe.